Hello, ladies and gents. It's Justin Johnson, one academic integrity of arts and humanities. We're on the module A225. On influence you today, young teenagers, mature adults, OAPs. We need to keep methodical and practice. If you want to get through your academic integrity, it's hard. You need to keep methodical and practice. Read every day. Go over your notes every single day. Better your surroundings. Better your future. Page 344. Unit 22. Looking backwards, looking forwards, the end of the long 19th century. Many social problems that emerged as a result of industrialisation and urbanisation. Macaulay saw English history as a chain of gradual progress, in contrast to revolutions and upheaval in Europe and the wider world, as you may recall from the unit The Age of Equipoise and the Great Exhibition of 1851. He is often seen as the classic Whig historian, but he was far from the only one. In his The Constitutional History of England, in its origin and development, 1873 to 8, William Stubbs, 1825 to 1901, Regus Professor of History at Oxford from 1866 to 1844, presented English history as one of the gradual development towards greater liberty. His book is a story of the growth of constitutional liberty out of local self government in the Middle Ages, culminating in the 19th century Houses of Parliament, which he elsewhere describes as a symbol of perfect political liberty. Stubbs, 1906. National history was reframed on a still broader scale in The Expansion of England, 1883, written by John Seeley, 1834 to 1895. Regus Professor of History in Cambridge from 1869 to 1895. Seeley, whom you may recall from the unit Britain and Empire, 1839 to 1886, Unit 15 in Block 2. Thought history had lessons to teach the present day. This was especially relevant in the 1880s, at a time of mounting anxiety about British imperial power. In addition, empires were traditionally interpreted as doomed projects, destined to repeat the fate of Roman Empire, as suggested by the historian Edward Gibbon, 1737 to 1794. In his widely read Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, published in 1776, just as Britain was losing its American colonies. More recently, Napoleonic France provided another vivid example of a powerful yet ultimately doomed empire. Seeley attempted to counter such narratives of decline and fall by taking the Whig history of the English liberties and constitutional progress and extended it to incorporate the settler colonies of the British Empire. Seeley's book was very popular. It sold 80,000 copies in 2 years and was still selling thousands a year in the 1930s. Mandler, 2002. Historians such as Macaulay, Stubbs, and Seeley were prominent figures, writing primarily for an informed and educated elite, books written for a wider public, in some ways, from a contrast. One of the most popular national histories in this period was J.R. Green's A Short History of the English People, 1874. The son of an Oxford tradesman, Green, 1837-1883, went on to be a clergyman and wrote in his spare time. His work is seen as a definitive romantic nationalist English history, Mandler 2002. He followed the Whig interpretation in seeing continuous political progress as a key foundation for social and cultural progress, and he described a vivid cast of characters and incidents that had shaped English history. But Green's national history was also innovative as he sought to present English history as a social history rather than just political history. Green's books was a massive success. It sold 326,000 copies when published and was still being read in all 1950s. Mandela 2002. It too played a big role in moulding people's notions of English national identity. J.R. Green preface to A Short History of the English People, 1874, located at the end of the unit, to get a better idea of Green's approach to English national history. What sort of history does Green dislike? What sort of history does Green want to focus on? Green's approach to history is one that does not focus on wars, diplomacy, or the deeds of kings and royal courts. He says that he wants to avoid writing what he calls drum and trumpet history, arguing that war doesn't play much of a role in English history. Instead, Green processes to focus on intellectual and social advance, and social trends such as the Methodist revival. Green comes out strongly against the high politics and drama of a kings and queens, battles and wars approach to history. His work is much closer to what we would call social history, even when Queen Elizabeth the First is portrayed. She is engaged in a leisure activity. There is a contrast here with the professional history that the editors of the English Historical Review advocated. Yet while Green's social history is innovative, it still follows the Whig interpretation of history. Green focuses on developments that he believes paint England in a progressive light, such as the Poor Law, rather than those such as civil wars, which don't. The past and national identity in wider society. The idea of national identity forged through an engagement with a national sense of the past encompassed more than just history books. Important though they were, historians such as Canadine and Paul Redman have argued that this engagement can also be seen in other social and cultural activities. Such engagement with the past could take different forms in different parts of the United Kingdom. In Wales, in response to the economic and social changes of the late 19th century, different elements of the past were combined to underpin a new sense of national identity. Migration from rural Wales, the development of the South Wales coalfield, discussed in Unit 16, and the social upheaval that resulted led to a new emphasis on protecting and developing Welsh language and culture. The most notable example of this desire was the cultural and culture was a cultural festival. The, the Eisteddfod, which self-consciously harked back to what was seen as a golden era of medieval Welsh culture, epitomised by the figure of the bard. A folk symbol of Welsh character, poetry and essay competitions often revolved around historical themes, such as Edward I's murder of a Welsh bard in 1282. Bardic groups evoking supposedly ancient Druid traditions were established across Wales and were given a new impetus by the Welsh cultural nationalists Lolo Morgan, 1747 to 1826. These groups were folded into the Eisteddfod tradition, giving the festivals a mythic tinge. True Welsh cultural nationalism in the late 19th century drew on the supposedly ancient traditions, rites, and mythology, which were distinct and separate from those of England. Nevertheless, this expression of nationalism was predominantly cultural, emphasising the preservation of the Welsh language and Welsh culture, and was not incompatible with British political nationalism. In contrast with the situation in Ireland, the demand for home rule in Wales and Scotland was marginal in this period. People's interest in the national past also manifested itself in the rise in the number of centenary, similar celebrations held in England. One celebration in particular stands out, the 1901 millennium of the King Alfred's death. This was focused on Winchester and saw a number of celebrations and commemorations, including the erection of a statue of the king. The millenary was very popular among all sections of society and featured in magazines and newspapers. Readman 2005. In Ireland, there were a number of commemorative activities to mark the centenary of the 1798 Rebellion, which you studied in Unit 6, such as the installation in Wexford of Oliver Shepherd's striking monument of rebel pikemen. The commemoration of the 1798 rebellion challenged the dominant British narrative and can be contrasted with Welsh cultural nationalism, which fitted within a British and imperial nation. History could be contentious, and using it to promote national identity could divide nations as well as unite them. My last example, popular engagement with the past, local and national, is that the historical these pagans were particularly popular in the Edwardian period, with over 40 held across English towns and cities between 1905 and 1914. They were also held in Scotland and other cities across the British Empire. A pagan industry grew up, coordinated by pagan masters. This section has explored how national identity, nationalism, and national history were constructed, shaped, and developed by a wide variety of people with different agendas, of course. There are many aspects of consolidation of national identities in this period beyond histories of nations and historical commemorations and pagans. But how our society looks at the past tells us a lot about how people thought about the time in which they lived. In the late 19th century, one way people reacted to rapid change was by seeking continuity with what they perceived as their national past. But let's now turn to how people in this period thought about the future and examine what it can tell us about our society. As you will see, how here to concerns about decline were mixed with confidence in progress. Page 350. .3 Looking forwards. Looking at what people in the past wrote about the future can give us a valuable and fascinating insight into what was on their minds. Gans 2016, revealing the hopes and fears of writers and their readers. Belief in progress was particularly prevalent in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and many visions of the future were bound up with this idea. Projecting progress into the future was another way of providing reassurance to both writers and readers during a period of rapid change. What follows is a tour through a number of features imagined at the time, in which you'll see some of the major themes of this module appear, such as a technological change, urbanisation, transport, communications, commerce, leisure, the role of the state, nationalism, and United Kingdom's place in the world. While the idea of progress had existed since at least the 18th century, before the 19th century, this was often understood as being of a rather abstract moral or intellectual nature. At the beginning of the Queen Victoria's reign in 1837, it was commonly believed that the future would, in practice, look much like the present. Rapid technological progress and its impact on society, however, led Victorians to develop a new attitude to the future, to imagine it as a very different place. In this sense, Victorian views of the future were often led by technology. For this reason, Victorian possible futures often seem close to our own. For instance, in science fiction, rapid progress and change encourage writers to think radically about the future. We can find examples both of utopias, imagined places where things are good, and of their opposite, dystopias, science fiction, contemporary hopes and anxieties. In the 1890s, the genre of science romance became very popular and laid the foundation for the genre of science fiction. French writers such as Jules Verne, 1828 to 1905, were pioneers in this field, with books such as Verne's From the Earth in the Moon, 1865, exploring space travel. The great novelty of these science romances is how they are infused with hopes and anxieties related to rapid change. France, after all, was facing many of the same challenges of rapidly changing society in this period as Britain and Ireland. The genre was adopted by the British and Irish writers and artists as a way of exploring concerns about the time in which they lived. Rudyard Kipling, who is usually associated with the stories of colonial India, also writes science fiction. His fascinating story with the Night Mail, a story of 2000 AD in 1905, tells of how airships make transatlantic flights. The narrator is on board one of these airships, the Night Mail, travelling from London to Quebec in Canada. Things such as radio communications and technical information about aircraft are described in great detail. As a first Zeppelin flight only happened in 1900, this story is a remarkable work of the imagination exploring the potential consequences of aerial and radio technology decades before intercontinental air travel. Kipling's story is a good example of how contemporaries saw the ways that modern technology could improve transport, communication, and commerce. Taken from Kipling's book, shows how his feature was different and yet reassuringly familiar. Given the wealth of new scientific theories and inventions of this period, it is not surprising that many science fiction writers were concerned with the impact of science on society. H. G. Wells, 1866-1946, dwelt on the consequences of Charles Darwin's theories of evolution and natural selection in The Time Machine, 1895. In this book, a time traveller goes to the year 802,701 to find that humans are involved in the Iloa, who lived above ground in an idyllic setting, and the Morlocks, who lived below ground. Gradually, the truth dawned on me. The man had not remained one species, but had differentiated into distinct animals. It seemed as clear as daylight to me that the gradual widening of the present merely temporary and social difference between the capitalist and the labourer was the key in the whole position. Even now, does not an East End of London worker live in such artificial conditions as practically to be cut off from the natural surface of the earth? This widening gulf, which is due to length and expense of higher educational process and increased facilities for and temptation toward refined habits on the part of the rich, which make that exchange between class and class. By intermarriage, which at present retards the splitting of our species along lines of social stratification, and less frequent, so in the end, above ground you must have the haves, pursuing pleasure and comfort and beauty, and below ground the have nots, the workers getting continually adapted to the conditions of their labour. How does Wells use the theory of evolution in his extract? What are the consequences of evolutionary change on humans? What do you think Wells is saying about the society in which he lives? Wells builds on Darwin's theory of evolution by imagining how humans might evolve into two very different species, Eloi and the Morlocks. This has happened because over time there was less and less interaction between the different social classes. The consequences of this evolutionary change are, are that some humans don't have to work. The haves and others do all the work. The have nots. It seems clear that Wells is concerned about social and economic inequality in his society. It's clear that this passage is a comment on the divisions between rich and poor that they exasperated by late 19th century capitalism, but it also imagines how inequality might combine with evolution in the future to create two separate species, reflecting contemporary fears among the upper and middle classes about the development of an upper class as explored in Unit 18. These fears become all too real when later in the book the Morlocks eat the helpless Isla in their time machine. The present projected forward becomes a dystopia in which Wells suggests that the class conflicts in this time will lead to evolutionary division and conflict. Page 350, 54. By socialist and designer William Morris, News from Nowhere, 1980, were more utopian. Morris drew on the medieval romantic tradition and merged it with socialist politics to tell the tale of William Guest, who tours a future society. Morris' utopian society has no private property, no money, no cities, and no criminals, and is a place where craft work replaces wage slavery, and held together by a pastoral love of the land. In Gang 2016. Here's the reaction of a nowhere ferryman when guests suggest using money to pay for things. I think I know what you mean. You think that I have done you a service. So you feel yourself bound to give me something which I am not to give to a neighbour unless he has done something special for me. I have heard of this kind of thing, but pardon me for saying that it seems to us a troublesome and roundabout custom, and we don't know how to manage it. And you see this ferrying and giving people cast about their water in my business, which I'll do for anybody. So take gifts in connection with it. It would look very queer. Besides, if one person gave me something, then another might, and another, and so on. And I hope you won't think me rude if I say that I shouldn't know where to stow away so many mementos of friendship. Morris's vision of a radical and positive future society was a powerful critic of contemporary society. Science fiction was also used as a vehicle for reactions of some of the major political changes of the period, such as Irish nationalism and Irish Home Rule, covering unit political ferment. Written by both nationalists and unionists in Tom Greer's A Modern Daedalus, 1885, an Irish boy invents a flying device that can be strapped to his shoulders. The British government tries to persuade him to use it against his fellow Irishmen. While he longs for peace, British military action in Ireland results in his joining Irish revolutionaries and a group of them with flying devices win independence for Ireland. Clute and Nichols, 2011. Science fiction and national decline. You're seeing that vision of the future could be both positive and negative. Some feared that the ongoing march of progress could be halted, others that the consequence of progress could backfire on humanity. Progress was fragile, and future decline was a potent topic. The pollution produced by industrialisation is taken to extremes in Fred M. White's The Doom of London, where the city suffers from smog pollution and then plagues, blizzards and earthquakes. Henry Marriott Watson, The Decline and Fall of the British Empire, highlights contemporary conservative fears about socialism and democracy and combines this with climate change. The Gulf Stream changes course, bringing Arctic conditions to the United Kingdom to bring about the downfall of the British Empire. Concerns about the United Kingdom's position in the world increased at the end of the 19th century. You've encountered some of these anxieties in previous units: economic concerns, industry and finance, the strength of the British Empire, and concerns about Germany outdoing the United Kingdom in technical education and social welfare policies. The safety of the United Kingdom, protected by the powerful Royal Navy, was put under increasing pressure by the advancing of the military technology. In writings about the future, reactions to technology change and geopolitical anxieties come together to produce compelling works that sketched dark pictures on the decline and fall of the British Empire. 1871, George Tompkins Chesney, a soldier who published the Battle of Dorking in Blackwood's magazine, launched a genre of future invasion stories that become very popular in this period. Set in 1921, his story tells how Germany destroys the Royal Navy with advanced fighter engines, invades and defeats the British in the Battle of Dorking. The result is German rule, and the end of it. Responding to contemporary concerns, he believed the United Kingdom's armed forces were unprepared for any invasion. Chesney's story caused uproar and led the government to announce plans for the reform of the army. In this case, a vision of the future led to changes in the present. The The theme of foreign invasion was taken up by other writers, including William Lequeux, who in 1894 published a book describing an invasion of the United Kingdom by France and Russia. The Great War in England, 1897, and later went on to write the bestseller describing the German invasion. The invasion of 1910 to 1906, Lequeux' novels, like Chesney's story, were partly meant to serve as a warning against complacency in the face of the new threats. Unlike the Battle of Dorking, however, the two later works end well, with British resistance driving out the invaders. Read the fictional proclamation and summarise its main features. In what ways does this proclamation demonstrate assumption of a unifying British national identity? The monarchy, capital, and nation itself, all symbols of national identity, are seen as the motivators most likely to inspire people to fight the enemy. The proclamation shows a confidence that the challenges posed by the invasion will lead to national unity and a stronger sense of patriotism. The Croc story is a good example of how national identities formed in opposition to other nations and reflected a wider hostility towards Germany at the turn of the century. The invasion of 1910 was serialised in Daily Mail when it was published as a book, 1906. It was translated in 27 languages and sold over 1 million copies. It struck a chord with a large section of the public at a time of growing tensions between the United Kingdom and Germany. The naval arms race with Germany started around 1906, and the Entente Cordiale with France in 1904 effectively removed France as a rival, leaving Germany as the obvious challenger to British interests and to balance of power within Europe. As we know, these tensions culminated in the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. H.G. Wells took the future invasion genre to another level with The War of the Worlds, in which the Earth is invaded by Martians. The novel is a powerful combination of journalistic reporting, science fiction, and invasion fears. The realism of the novel shocked readers. We see Serbia in its English slumber until the Martian invasion begins outside working. The technological advanced Martians unleash a black smoke that gasses people. The image of smoke drifted over the Thames Valley is one of the destruction. The great imperial capital is cowed. The peace of rustic England shattered forever. Allowed him to write about microbes and a sudden intervention that saved humanity from extinction in the future. Humanity might face from outer space, but Wells believed could help defeat advanced extraterrestrial technology. This is an example of how positive and negative conception of the future coexisted in the science fiction of the period. The conclusion, page 360. In this unit, we've examined how people in the period between 1880 and 1914 created the radical social, economic, and political change. This may remind you in Unit 4, the period 1789 to 1840 was another time of rapid change that saw new practical and spiritual forms of knowledge emerge as ways to understand and manage new uncertainties. These in turn shaped the development of the state, government policy, and public and private institutions. By the end of the 19th century, this process of change was reaching its peak. Contemporaries were experiencing not only continuing major demographic and economic changes, but also what calls increasingly abstract and bureaucratic ways of making economic, social, and political relations between distinct strangers. As we have seen, Victorians and Edwardians made sense of this new society of strangers by developing an increased awareness of both the past and the future. The rapid changes they experienced were often understood through the notions of progress and modernity, which both imply breaking with an inferior past as well as looking towards an improved future. But at the same time, people also sought continuity with and reassurance from The past. Their growing awareness of the past was reflected in developments ranging from the study and practical of history to the stagging of historical pavements and also influenced the writing of national history. In a similar way, visions of the future were often optimistic, but also betrayed a number of deep seated anxieties about the changes people were experiencing. I hope this unit has demonstrated that there is more than one way to look at historical change. It is essential for historians to investigate economic, political, and social developments, but it is also important to understand how contemporaries felt about what they were experiencing. I hope examining people's engagement with people, the past, and the future has helped you understand how they cope with a rapidly changing society and how they made sense of the emerging modern world.